Barcelona's biggest match of the season so far, at least in terms of opponent's pedigree, is now less than 48 hours away. PSG, even at home, seems like a daunting task, but this match is much more than just the club names. Welcome to episode 730 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and first and foremost, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Help me get to 50,000 subscribers. Also, give me a good rating on the podcast apps to become a Patreon for as low as $3. And most importantly, please join me. We've got a fantasy game going on as well on bigup.com. It's a free membership to get in the chat. Have fun with me as we watch the game together. So that is on bigup.com for the game against PSG, and then come back to the podcast apps or the YouTube channel for the 5 headlines shortly thereafter. But before we get to the 5 headlines and the match itself, we've got to get into the preview. So let's dive in. The biggest headline leading into this game is the injuries. We know about Gabi. He's going to be out for a while. And for Barcelona coming in, having just lost Rafinha and Joan Garcia the week before, Balde may not be entirely fit. We'll see if he gets the full medical green light. We know that Marc Bernal is just coming back. Lamine Yamal also just came back in the last game against Real Sociedad. And Fermin Lopez is also going to be out for a few more weeks. So with all that negativity and the injuries that Barcelona have been dealing with in the early part of the year, also De Jong and Lewandowski when the season began, but Hansi Flick and Barcelona are actually the much healthier side. PSG could potentially be missing all of, now the first 3 are doubtful in Vitinha, Kvara, and João Neves. So those 3 are doubtful. If they're all available, this is an entirely different game. But we're going to go under the assumption that those 3 will not be fully fit for this one. So when I go over lineups and all that stuff, they will not be in the starting 11s, even if they are fit to come off the bench. Marquinhos is going to be out completely. Ousmane Dembélé, the Ballon d'Or winner, also out completely. And Desiree Douillet is also going to be missing. So by my count, that's PSG missing 6 players who are starters. And for Barcelona, they're missing basically a 2+1. I would say that Dani Olmo, we're going to say that he's a starter over Fermin Lopez for this exercise. And we're going to say that Frenkie de Jong and Pedri are the starters over Gabi. So it's really just Rafinha and Joan Garcia. But I think Culés are already starting to wonder whether Marcus Rashford can't do at least a large portion of the job that Rafinha gives you. They're different players, but Rashford and Ferran Torres are giving you quite a lot so far to start this season, that the loss of Rafinha may not be the worst thing in the world. I think Barcelona will miss him, but they will be able at least to survive without him. The question for PSG is, can they possibly survive without all of those players? Which does lead us into our lineup predictions. For Barcelona, of course, it's going to be Szczesny in net. And in front of him, I have Gerard Martin, Cubarsí, Araujo, and Koundé. And then Pedri and De Jong in the double pivot. Of course, who else? Olmo in front of them. And then Rashford, Torres, and Lamine Yamal being my front 3. The only real surprise here, and I'll get to the Araujo part of that later, but I guess it would be along that front line with me starting Ferran Torres instead of Lewandowski. The reason for this is because Ferran Torres, as far as his mobility, I think is going to be more important than what you're going to have to get out of Lewandowski late in that match, taking on some of the physicality of the center backs. Now, I know there is a fear that Ferran Torres is going to get swallowed up and get lost with those center backs, but I think this game could get a bit up and down, and I just don't want Lewandowski getting lost in the shuffle. Ferran Torres has been trusted in these kind of games so far to start the season, and Lewandowski having just started against Real Sociedad. So taking all that into account is why I think Ferran Torres is going to get the start over Lewandowski for this one, with Rashford and Lamine Yamal complementing him on the wings. Then shifting gears to PSG, really I have no idea. I've looked at PSG stuff, I've listened to PSG podcasts, I've watched PSG YouTubers, and I'm trying to figure out, well, they don't even know who's going to be available for this match yet. We might know more by the time you've got this in your eyes or in your ears. But for who might be available or who's expected to be available, I'm assuming that it's going to be Chevalier in net with Nuno Mendes, Pacho, Zabarni, and Hakimi along the back line, with Fabian Ruiz, Kang-in Lee, and Mayulu in the midfield, and then Barcola, Gonçalo Ramos, and Mabai up top. So that 11, I could be completely wrong. We've seen Kang-in Lee play as a forward. We've seen Mayulu play as a false 9. So there are a lot of different permutations that Luis Enrique can go with this. And if anything, with all the injuries, the element of surprise is kind of what Luis Enrique might have as the ace up his sleeve. But as far as having a healthy team, when we talk about a lot of the players I just mentioned, we talk about players that are not regular starters for PSG. And when we spoke about the ones who are injured, it's a lot of players who even won a Champions League last season with Luis Enrique up that spine. With so many questions, our tactical breakdown is kind of having to take those lineups into account. So we're going to assume that those are the lineups, and I know I'm making a lot of assumptions with PSG, but either way, whoever starts for PSG, whoever starts for Barcelona, I think this match, and many pundits have agreed with me, that it will largely or should be decided at least by the wings. If PSG want to have a chance in this game, then Bradley Barcola cannot be a spot player. He's got to be the guy. He is usually the fourth choice attacker behind Douye, Dembele, and Kvara, and he's got to be the guy. This is his time. This is his moment to be the guy for PSG, and he's going to have to be the player that either makes Koundé pay. I expect him to be on the left, but if he is on the right, he also has the ability to play either flank, then he might want to attack Gerard Martin. So where Luis Enrique puts Barcola is going to tell you a lot about the way, I guess, Luis Enrique respects either Koundé or Gerard Martin on the other side. And then for Barcelona, it's going to be Lamine Yamal against Nuno Mendes. If Lamine Yamal gets all over Nuno Mendes, who has an argument to being the best fullback in the world, and Lamine Yamal obviously had the argument for being the best winger in the world. He just finished second in the Ballon d'Or, and Dembele largely played in the middle last season. So yeah, it might be the best fullback against the best winger in the world. And I don't want to say it's mano-a-mano, because we know that 1v1 matchups don't decide games, but Lamine Yamal is a game decider. And if he's completely pocketed by Nuno Mendes, well, then PSG certainly have a chance in this one. And then sticking on the wings, one of the ways that PSG could break down that offside trap is through Hakimi running in behind. And not necessarily as the first runner, but as the second runner or the third runner. And this is kind of my question as to how Luis Enrique is going to start his players. I think it is going to be Gonçalo Ramos as a regular number 9, like a stable guy to kind of stand in between Araujo and Cubarsí and attract some of the attention from the center backs, which would then make the movement of Mayulu and whoever winds up running in from that midfield, his movement as the free man off of Ramos could be what's essential to this. As I've said, Mayulu could also play as a false 9, putting even more onus then on balls over the top and trying to break through that offside press on the wings. But I do think Ramos starts this because I think Luis Enrique, having studied the tape, and Rayo Vallecano was the only other team who's done it successfully because Barcelona have caught everybody else in both Europe and in the Liga offside more than any other team in the Big Five leagues. So I think that Luis Enrique might have Ramos generally setting up in an offside position the way that Rayo Vallecano did, and then trusting, again, the free man run of Mayulu from the middle, and then Hakimi being the late runner on the wing to try to beat that offside trap, which does lend to the question of will Araujo start or not. I don't think that Hansi Flick is going to go away from the offside trap, but Mundo Deportivo had put out a report today saying that Araujo could be swapped out for Eric Garcia and Cubarsí since those two were rested against Real Sociedad. But that could also be a giant smokescreen by a paper that is pretty friendly to the club, and Araujo could just be starting here. And I would start Araujo in this case, whether it's Ramos starting or it's a false 9, and it could be Kang and Lee as well. Either way, it's either going to be Ramos as a typical number 9, or it's going to be a false 9 that you know that Araujo and Cubarsí are just going to have to watch out for. But if anything, that plays into Barcelona's hands, because then they can just kind of sit in with that high line and be able to work with everything that's in front of them and having to deal with the guy who's in an offside position behind them. Now, talking about the history between these two clubs, it is all about redemption. These two clubs haven't really met that often, which does say a little bit about PSG having their success in recent years. They actually only met once before the 2012 season, and that was way back in the 94-95 season when a PSG side led by George Weah beat the Barcelona team led by Hristo Stoichkov 3-2 on aggregate after a 2-1 win in Paris. But the recent matchups between these two are all about the 16-17 season in maybe the most famous match of the 21st century, at least the most famous Champions League remontada, when Barca went down 4-0 in Paris, but scored 3 and then gave up a goal to Cavani, but then scored 3 goals from the 88th minute on, 2 from Neymar, and then, of course, the miracle from Sergio Roberto to win it. This decade, though, has been all about PSG. They won 5-2 on aggregate in 2021, beating a Barca side that just wasn't good enough. And then most recently, back in 2024, it was a 3-2 win for Barca in Paris. That put them in a good position to advance, but then a red card from Araujo early in the return leg gave way to 4 goals from PSG and the quarterfinal exit from Barcelona. This match, and why I think Araujo will start instead of being a substitute, and I know that the Catalan papers are saying that, well, he might not be trusted in the situation because he's come up short before, but no, that's actually the very reason why I think Hansi Flick is going to trust in one of his captains, and he's going to start Araujo, and this, very much like PSG have been getting their redemption and their revenge for the last 2 matchups, this is the moment, this is the time for redemption for Ronald Araujo. Which brings me to our final talking point, and that is our score prediction, which I do think Ronald Araujo gets some redemption here. Is he going to score a goal? I don't know. But as long as he keeps PSG offside plenty of times, and at least enough times for Barcelona's attack to have some fun in the other final third of the field, well, then Araujo did his job. I was fair to Newcastle, thinking that was going to be a draw on the road, But with all the injuries to PSG and this one taking place in Catalonia, I'm going to give the edge to Barcelona. I think this game ends, though, 3-2 to the Catalans, because I do think all of those X factors and all those players that Hansi Flick isn't really sure who he's preparing for, I think that's going to be enough chaos for Luis Enrique to break through that offside trap a few times. That's why I'm going with 3-2 for this one. I do think the speed on the wings for PSG will give them some success, but I don't think they're going to be comfortable enough defending with their spine, because the one thing I also didn't mention for PSG along that back line is Chevalier, who replaced Donnarumma. He's had some growing pains so far. Just last week, PSG, without Ousmane Dembélé as he was winning the Ballon d'Or, lost to Marseille 1-0. And this could be another huge match for them, as PSG have not really been tested outside of that match so far. Barcelona, I feel like, have been tested a little bit better, even though there haven't really been any big names so far. But hey, I want to give some credit to Newcastle in the fight that they gave Barcelona. But yeah, I'm going Barcelona 3-2 in this one, and that might even be giving too much credit to that PSG attack. So again, please join me on Big Up for that watch along. We're going to have the fantasy game as well. And please help me get to 50,000 subscribers on YouTube. Give a like, give a comment, that pushes the algorithm as well, because I do expect this to be some of the biggest energy and audience that we get, at least in the first half of the season, before things really matter in the spring, when hopefully Barcelona is a bit more healthy. And of course, El Clasico in the coming weeks as well. But for now, all the focus on PSG. So until then, Forza Barca.